Hello! So, if you read the thumbnail, you'd probably realize that this is part 2, which means there is a part 1. So you should go watch that, because I put a lot of effort into that video. And if you already saw it, you're cool, I guess. Anyway, let's begin from where we left off last time. We woke up in the morning in Wapiti Campground on our squeezed little campsite where a little camper could barely fit. The first thing we did that morning was eat breakfast. The second thing we did that morning was walk around Jasper since it's a beautiful place, and we went for an afternoon swim in Lake Annette. It was glacier blue, so you know what that means. My dad made me swim anyway. After that, we went for a hike around the lake, and there were a bunch of these benches named in memory of people. For some reason, I just avoided sitting on those benches as a kid, thinking that people on the benches were buried underneath the bench or something. If my name were on a bench after I die, I would probably have a quote on it saying something along the lines of, "Dude, it's a bench. You're supposed to sit on it. You look tired. Sit down." After the walk, we went down the hill, back to our campsite, which was pretty bumpy in some parts, but we didn't care, until we realized there was still water in the dishpan. We cleaned that up and went for a walk along the river, where I found this cool little spoon-shaped rock, which I later decided to keep. The next day, we wanted to take our trip a little further, so we decided to head into British Columbia, specifically Mount Robson Provincial Park. When we got there, we set up and then went for a little hike through the forest and came across this 125-year-old cabin by the river. Also, my brother was just rhyming to keep the bears away. Throw, crow, show, slow, doe. No! By the time we got back from the hike, it was pretty late, so we didn't do any more things that day. But the next day, we decided to hike on the Berg Lake Trail, which is one of the most popular ones in the area. At the bottom of the mountain, it was very lush and green. Lots of moss and grass from the water running down the mountain. We left the forest and walked onto this cool little pebble/grapple delta, where there were a bunch of little streams that we had to jump over. We also had to cross the main river, which had a bridge across it, but the bridge was super thin and only had a handrail on one side. There was also a sign that basically said, "This bridge is dangerous. Be careful, I guess." We climbed back into the forest, and there were more high cliffs and sketchy railings, until we got to a part where the mountain got really steep. We agreed to turn around since we had already hiked up 9.5 kilometers, which has taken us 3 to 4 hours, and we had also to hike all the way back. Fun fact, if we actually kept hiking for another 10 kilometers or so, we would have actually ended up back in Alberta. We also saw some cool guys on horses with cowboy hats and stuff crossing the delta. They looked like absolute professionals, but in the back there were people who were probably tourists who were wearing helmets and taking selfies, not knowing how to control their horses. By the late afternoon, we finally made it back after hiking a full 19 kilometers. The next couple of days were spent going back to Jasper, doing our laundry, and getting a few souvenirs before we left. I got a cool weird carving of an eagle and a deer stuffy/hunting trophy, and my brother got a hoodie and t-shirt that said Jasper on it. After leaving Jasper, we hiked by this cool little canyon that was super deep with a rushing river at the bottom. We also drove by this huge lake that somehow had people standing out in the middle of it as if they were walking on the water. So we had to stop one more time and walk out on it. It was extremely shallow, only up to our knees at most, and the depth barely changed as we walked further out. But then it started to rain with thunder, so we thought it would be a good idea to get out of the lake before it got worse. It was that day that we had to say goodbye to the mountains, and just like driving up to them, they ended just like that. The drive the following day was pretty interesting. We stopped in the town of Edson to see their train museum and also grab some maps for my collection. I didn't mention this in the first video, but I was collecting maps from every province. It was like a gauntlet or something. I had to collect them all. In a little lakeside town called Wabamoon, we saw Canada's largest dragonfly, made of scrap metal and painted to look like an insect. We drove straight through Edmonton and arrived in Elk Island Park. We didn't get to see any elk there, but there was plenty of bison. When the evening rolled around, we were ready to go for a swim. But the water was really gross and there was no one in it. You could literally stand right next to the edge of the beach and still not see the bottom. Early the next morning, we set off to get to our next destination. Nothing really interesting happened over the prairies. There weren't a lot of pictures to take, But we stayed in Saskatoon, Regina, and rocketed through Manitoba again, got back to Dryden, and shortly after that, Kenora. We realized that we didn't get to see much of Kenora on our way to Jasper, so we thought we would look around. There were plenty of boats and float planes since Kenora is on the Lake of the Woods. We walked along the docks to see some of the planes, but surprise, we were going to fly in one. I actually have a video of that. Take a look.
Here we go! Touchdown. And there we are.
After safely touching down, we had our lunch and got back on the road again. A couple of days later, and we arrived back in Thunder Bay to stay a couple of days at the Sleeping Giant Provincial Park. When we arrived, it was foggy and late since we started driving a little later than usual. There were a couple of foxes on the road on the way in, just minding their own business. It was 1 a.m. and we finally got to our campsite. In the morning, we went on another hike that was about the same length as Berg Lake Trail. This one took us up all the way up the mountain, or Giant, where we could see the whole park from above. The beginning was really flat where bikers could go, but once we arrived at the base, things got steep fast. At the top, you could look up and see the clouds whooshing above you, and you could look down and see the longest vertical drop in the entire province. We stayed up there for a bit to get some cell phone service, since we couldn't get anywhere else in the park, and then headed back down towards the parking lot. A couple more interesting places we went to along Lake Superior would be Rainbow Falls, cool little falls with camping and hiking along the falls, Pebble Beach, a beach with lots of big smooth stones right on the lake, and Manitouwash, a little former mining town in the woods with plenty of outdoor activities where some kids actually asked us about our sign. Remember the one I talked about in the first part? Before we went to Manitouwash, we were having some problems with getting our car to start, so we bought a new battery and installed it. The problem was that it made the clock reset to 12 o'clock, even though it was actually 3-ish hours later, so we wouldn't have actually gone to Manitouwash if we had realized that it was so late in the day. We were so confused why the sun was setting at 4 o'clock, and that was when it dawned on us. Sault Ste. Marie was our next major stop, where we explored the Canadian Bush Plane Heritage Museum because my brother is really into that stuff. We spent the next night at Chutes Provincial Park, where we had a big waterfall with a lake and a little island out in the middle. We swam out to the island, skipped rocks, and left some epic artwork that we made out of bark that had sunk to the bottom of the lake. Our last city to explore was Sudbury, looking all industrial and rocky, with all the mines and factories and the big smokestack you can see for miles, or kilometers depending on where you're from. Our last stop was in Kilbear Provincial Park on the Georgian Bay. We got a site, went for a swim, and walked along the beach. In conclusion, Canada is a huge country, and I still haven't seen the whole thing. I'm really thankful that I've been able to go on this trip during this time, and I understand that some people don't get the chance to do things like this. I'm also thankful for everyone that is subscribed, and if you're not subscribed, there's no reason not to. If you like what I'm doing here on YouTube, then be sure to sub, because this 2-part series took me an eternity to make. That's it for me. I'll catch you all in the next one. See ya.